I'm Stephanie, 34, and I never expected my 5-year wedding anniversary to end with divorce papers. When my father-in-law Harold handed me that cream-colored envelope with a smug smile, I felt my world collapse. James, my husband, just sat there, silent. They thought they had won, that I would crumble. But what neither of them knew was that I had my own envelope ready. Before I tell you how I ended up with divorce papers as an anniversary gift, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe if you're ready for the most satisfying revenge story of your life. I met James at a marketing conference in Chicago 7 years ago. I was 27 then, ambitious and determined to make my mark in the industry. He was 28, charming, with kind eyes and a genuine interest in my work that felt refreshing after years of dating men who seemed intimidated by my career drive. Our connection was instant. We spent the entire conference finding excuses to bump into each other, and by the closing dinner, we were inseparable. What began as professional networking quickly turned into late-night phone calls, weekend trips between our cities, and eventually, a proposal just 10 months later. James came from money, old money. His father Harold had built a chain of luxury hotels across the country, turning a single inheritance into an empire. James worked for his father's company, always carefully navigating the delicate balance between son and employee. The first time I met Harold, at an engagement dinner at his sprawling estate outside Boston, I sensed his disapproval before he'd even spoken a word. "So, you're the one keeping my son from focusing on the business," were Harold's first words to me, delivered with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. James laughed it off. "Dad's just joking, Steph. He's thrilled I found someone." But Harold wasn't joking, and he wasn't thrilled. Over drinks later that evening, while James was showing his mother photos from our engagement trip, Harold cornered me on the terrace. "James has responsibilities to this family, to the business," he said quietly. "I'm sure you understand that nothing, not even marriage, changes that fact." I was determined not to let Harold intimidate me. "I support James completely," I replied. "His success is important to me too." Harold swirled his scotch, eyes narrowed. "We'll see." Despite Harold's cold reception, we had a beautiful wedding. I'd hoped my father-in-law would warm to me over time, especially once he saw how happy I made his son. But instead, his interference only grew more pronounced. During our first year of marriage, Harold would call James for urgent business matters during date nights, weekends away, even during a brief vacation to Puerto Rico. He'd frequently request James at family dinners without extending the invitation to me. "It's just business talk," James would explain. "You'd be bored anyway." I tried everything to win Harold over. I attended charity events important to the family business. I hosted dinner parties to entertain Harold's business associates. I even took interest in the hotel industry, offering marketing insights when appropriate. Nothing worked. The real trouble began during our 3rd year of marriage, when I was offered a promotion at my marketing firm. The position meant more responsibility, higher pay, and occasional travel. Harold made his disapproval clear at a family dinner shortly after my announcement. "I always assumed you'd eventually step back from work to focus on family," he commented while cutting his steak with surgical precision. "Isn't that the natural progression?" "Dad," James began, but Harold continued. "The Bailey men need supportive wives, not colleagues." His gaze fixed on me. "Our family has traditions, Stephanie." I felt my cheeks flush. "My career is important to me, Harold. And James supports that." "Does he?" Harold turned to his son. "James, have you considered how her traveling will affect your own work? Your commitment to the company?" Instead of defending me, James stared at his plate. "We'll make it work, Dad." That night, I confronted James about his silence. "Why didn't you stand up for me?" "You know how Dad is," he replied, loosening his tie. "He's old-fashioned, but he means well. He just wants what's best for us." "What's best for us, or what's best for him?" I asked. James sighed. "Sometimes it's easier to let him think he's right. It doesn't change what we do." But it did change things. As my career grew, so did the tension in our marriage. James started working later, attending more business dinners with his father. He began dropping hints about starting a family, though we'd agreed to wait until we were more established. "Dad thinks we're waiting too long," he'd say. And maybe he has a point. For years into our marriage, I discovered James and Harold had been discussing my career without my knowledge. I overheard a phone call where James told his father, "I'm working on it, Dad. She'll come around to the idea of stepping back." When confronted, James was defensive. "Dad's just concerned about our future. About building a family legacy." Is that so wrong? The gap between us widened. The man who once supported my ambitions now seemed to view them as an obstacle. Meanwhile, my friendship with Megan, a colleague who'd been through a difficult divorce herself, became my lifeline. She recognized the patterns I couldn't yet see. "He's choosing his father over you," Megan pointed out over lunch one day. "And they're both trying to mold you into something you're not." I denied it at first, making excuses for James and his family dynamics. But the evidence became harder to ignore, especially when, 2 months before our anniversary, I overheard a conversation between James and Harold in Harold's study during a family gathering. "She's temporary, son," Harold was saying. "I knew it from the beginning. She'll never truly be a Bailey." There was a pause before James replied, his voice lower, harder to hear. "I know, Dad. I know." Those words crushed something inside me. Temporary? After 5 years of marriage? After all my attempts to fit into their world while maintaining my identity? As our anniversary approached, I felt increasingly anxious. James suggested we celebrate at his parents' estate, with Harold hosting a dinner for us and the extended family. It felt wrong. Our anniversary should be about us, not another opportunity for Harold to assert control, but James insisted. "Dad wants to do this for us," he said. "Can't you just appreciate that he's trying?" But Harold wasn't trying to celebrate our marriage. He was preparing to end it. The months leading up to our anniversary were a steady accumulation of slights and revelations. Harold's passive-aggressive comments about my career choices evolved into more direct criticism during family gatherings. "Another business trip next month, Stephanie?" he asked during Sunday dinner at the estate. "James mentioned you'll be gone for a week this time. Such dedication to your job." The way he said job made it sound like a hobby, something frivolous and temporary. James's sister April shot me a sympathetic look across the table, but remained silent. No one in the family ever contradicted Harold. "It's an important client launch," I explained, keeping my tone light despite the knot forming in my stomach. "The campaign has been in development for months." "More important than family obligations, clearly," Harold replied, nodding toward James. "My son sits at home alone while you climb the corporate ladder." I waited for James to interject, to point out that he was hardly sitting at home alone. He worked 60-hour weeks himself and frequently traveled for the family business. Instead, he studied his wine glass and murmured, "It's fine, Dad. We make it work." But we weren't making it work, not really. These family dinners had become battlegrounds of thinly veiled insults and undermining comments. Harold would inevitably steer the conversation toward traditional family values, making pointed remarks about women who prioritize correctly. James's mother Catherine would nod along, occasionally adding how she'd given up her own career aspirations to support Harold's business growth. "Best decision I ever made," she would say, patting Harold's hand while looking meaningfully at me. After these dinners, the drive home became increasingly tense. "Your father basically called me a bad wife in front of everyone," I said one night, gripping the passenger door handle as James took a curve too fast. "He didn't say that exactly," James replied, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "He's from a different generation, Steph. He doesn't understand modern marriages. Do you understand? Do you actually support my career, or do you agree with him?" James's hesitation before answering told me everything. "I support you," he finally said. "But I also understand where Dad's coming from. He built everything for the family, for future generations. He wants to see that continue. Through me giving up my identity and career? Through us prioritizing family, James corrected, his voice hardening. Maybe Dad has a point about your traveling so much. We've been married 5 years, Steph. When are we going to start thinking about kids? It was the same circular argument we'd been having with increasing frequency. What had changed was James's position. When we first married, he'd been emphatic about supporting my career growth, about us being partners in every sense. Now, he sounded more and more like Harold. The shift became even more apparent when I was offered a significant opportunity at work, leading a new division that would mean relocation to Denver. It was the kind of career advancement I'd been working toward for years. It's only a 3-hour flight, I explained over dinner at our apartment. We could make it work until you found a position there too. Your father's company is expanding to Colorado anyway, right? James put down his fork. You can't seriously be considering this. Why not? It's an amazing opportunity. Because our life is here, Stephanie. My family is here. The business is here. Your family, your business, I echoed. What about my family, my business? That's different and you know it, he snapped. The Bailey name means something in this city. I have responsibilities. And I don't? My career doesn't matter? James ran a hand through his hair. Of course it matters. But there are limits. Dad thinks. I don't care what your father thinks. I interrupted, my patience finally breaking. This is our marriage, not his. The argument escalated, ending with James storming out to clear his head. He returned hours later, smelling of his father's preferred scotch. I didn't need to ask where he'd been. The following week, my friend Megan and I met for coffee. After listening to me recount the latest argument, she leaned forward. Have you considered that Harold might be actively trying to sabotage your marriage? She asked. What? No. He's controlling and traditional, but... Steph, think about it. The constant criticism, pulling James away for emergency meetings during your plans, the way he undermines you at every turn. That's not just being old-fashioned. I stirred my coffee, uncomfortable with the direction of her thoughts. James wouldn't let that happen. Megan gave me a pointed look. Are you sure? When was the last time he chose you over his father's wishes? Her question haunted me. That evening, I found myself doing something I'd never imagined, going through James's emails. It felt wrong, invasive, but Megan's words had planted a seed of suspicion I couldn't ignore. What I found confirmed my worst fears. In an email exchange with his father from 3 months prior, James wrote, I understand your concerns, Dad. Stephanie's career focus has been a challenge for our marriage. I've tried talking to her about scaling back, but she's stubborn. Maybe you're right about taking more drastic measures if things don't improve. Harold's reply was even more chilling. Son, I've seen this before. Career women like Stephanie don't change. They promise family eventually, but that day never comes. The Bailey legacy deserves better. If she can't adapt to our family values by your anniversary, we'll need to consider our options. I've already spoken with Martin about the legal implications. Martin was the family attorney. My hand shook as I closed the laptop. They had been plotting against me, discussing options as if I were a business problem to solve. And our anniversary was clearly their deadline. 2 weeks before the anniversary, I was on a business trip to New York when I received a text from April, James's sister. Call me when you can talk privately. Important. April and I had always been friendly, but never particularly close. She lived in the shadow of her domineering father and brother, rarely expressing independent opinions. Her message surprised me. Harold's planning something for your anniversary, she said when I called from my hotel room. I overheard him talking with James and Martin. Something about papers being prepared. What kind of papers? I asked, though I already suspected. I'm not sure exactly, April replied, her voice barely above a whisper. But he said it would solve the Stephanie problem once and for all. James didn't object, Steph. I'm sorry. The betrayal cut deep. Not just Harold's manipulation, but James's complicity. The man I married, who had once looked at me with such admiration and love, was now conspiring with his father to end our marriage. That night, I barely slept. By morning, my heartbreak had hardened into resolve. If they wanted to blindside me at my own anniversary dinner, they would find I wasn't as easily manipulated as they thought. The anniversary dinner was held in the formal dining room of Harold's mansion. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the mahogany table, which had been elaborately set with the family's finest china and silver. Flower arrangements of white roses and lilies, reminiscent of our wedding decorations, adorned the center of the table and the sideboard. It would have been beautiful if not for the underlying tension I felt with every breath. James and I arrived together but had barely spoken during the drive. He seemed distracted, checking his phone repeatedly and fiddling with his cufflinks, a gift from his father. I'd chosen to wear a sleek black dress rather than something more celebratory, a decision that hadn't gone unnoticed. Interesting choice for an anniversary celebration, Harold commented when we arrived, his eyes sweeping critically over my outfit. Rather somber, isn't it? I thought it was appropriate, I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. The guest list included Harold and Catherine, James's sister April and her husband, 2 sets of aunts and uncles from the Bailey side, and Harold's brother Edward, who served as the family's financial advisor. 12 people total, none of whom were my friends or family. I'd wanted to invite my parents, but James had insisted this was tradition, Bailey anniversaries celebrated with Bailey family. Throughout the appetizer and main course, Harold controlled the conversation, reminiscing about James's childhood accomplishments and the growth of the family business. Pointed omissions of my contributions to James's life punctuated each anecdote. Catherine occasionally glanced my way with what might have been sympathy, but she never contradicted her husband. And now, Harold announced as dessert was being served, we come to the reason for tonight's gathering. 5 years of marriage is a significant milestone. The serving staff discreetly exited the dining room, leaving only family present. Harold stood, raising his glass. Marriage in the Bailey family has always been about more than just love. It's about commitment to our shared values, our legacy. His eyes settled on me. To building something greater than oneself. I felt James tense beside me, his hand clenching his napkin. Some marriages strengthen that legacy, Harold continued. Others, unfortunately, proved to be obstacles. He set down his glass and reached for a cream-colored envelope beside his plate. Stephanie, we've watched for 5 years as you've chosen career over family, ambition over tradition. A heavy silence fell over the table. April stared at her plate. Catherine's lips thinned to a disapproving line. This evening should be a celebration, Harold said, his voice carrying an artificial note of regret, but instead, it must be a moment of clarity. Sometimes, the greatest gift is truth. He extended the envelope toward me. It's time to end the charade. My heart pounded as I accepted the envelope, though I already knew what it contained. With steady hands that belied my inner turmoil, I opened it and removed the documents inside. Divorce papers. Already bearing James's signature. We thought it best to handle this as efficiently as possible, Harold explained, as if discussing a business transaction. The terms are generous. The family will provide a suitable settlement in exchange for your discretion and cooperation. I looked at James, whose eyes remained fixed on the table. You signed these. Not a question, but a confirmation. It's for the best, Steph, he finally said, his voice barely audible. We want different things. We, I repeated. You and me, or you and your father? Harold interjected before James could respond. My son has finally recognized his responsibilities to this family. Your career ambitions are simply incompatible with the Bailey name. I see. I carefully returned the papers to the envelope. If you sign tonight, Harold continued, we can handle this discreetly. The family attorney has arranged everything. I noticed several family members shifting uncomfortably in their seats. This public humiliation was clearly unexpected even to them. April looked physically ill, while her husband stared stonily at Harold. 5 years of marriage ended with divorce papers at an anniversary dinner, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. What an interesting tradition. Sentiment is a poor substitute for practicality, Harold replied dismissively. James needs a wife who understands family comes first. Your reluctance to start a family, your Denver aspirations, they've made your priorities clear. The mention of Denver confirmed my suspicions. They'd been monitoring my career moves, planning this ambush for months. And James agrees with this assessment? I turned to my husband, forcing him to meet my eyes. After 5 years together, you couldn't even tell me yourself? You needed Daddy to do it for you? James's face flushed. You're not being fair. I've tried talking to you about our future. While conspiring with your father behind my back, I finished for him. Don't blame James, Harold cut in sharply. He simply recognized what you refused to see, you're not Bailey material. Never were. The dining room fell completely silent. Catherine finally spoke, her voice soft but clear. Harold, perhaps this could have been handled more privately. Nonsense, Harold dismissed her with a wave. Family matters are family business. Everyone here understands what's at stake. I sat perfectly still, absorbing the full weight of the betrayal. Not just James's weakness, but the calculated cruelty of the timing and setting. This public humiliation was meant to break me, to send me away quietly with my tail between my legs. They had drastically underestimated me. 3 months earlier, I had been looking for an earring back in our bedroom when I noticed James's phone light up on the nightstand. Normally, I would have ignored it, but the preview of a text message from Harold caught my attention. Martin has the paperwork ready. Timing discussion needed. Something about the message raised alarms. What paperwork required timing discussions? And why involve Martin, the family attorney? That night, while James showered, I did something I'd never done before, I checked his phone. What I found was an extensive text exchange between father and son discussing my career problem and how to resolve the situation before it's too late. No explicit mention of divorce, but enough to raise serious concerns. The next morning, I called an old college friend, Lisa, who now worked as a private investigator. I need to know what they're planning, I told her over coffee in a cafe far from my usual haunts. I feel crazy even asking, but... You're not crazy, Lisa interrupted. If your gut is telling you something's wrong, listen to it. Most people regret not trusting their instincts sooner. Lisa agreed to look into Harold and James's activities discreetly. Financial records are often the most revealing, she explained. Especially with wealthy families like the Baileys. They think they're untouchable, which makes them careless. Within 2 weeks, Lisa had uncovered troubling patterns. Harold had recently created several new offshore accounts. Large sums were being moved through a complex network of shell companies. James had been added as a signatory to some of these accounts just months prior. This goes beyond divorce planning, Lisa told me, spreading financial documents across my office desk after hours. These are classic signs of tax evasion and possibly fraud. I stared at the papers, trying to process what I was seeing. Are you sure? Harold's business is complex, but he's always been obsessed with his reputation. Would he really risk everything? Lisa pointed to several highlighted transactions. These coincide with major hotel acquisitions in the Bailey portfolio. Look at the purchase prices reported publicly versus what actually changed hands. Classic value manipulation. My marketing firm had handled PR for several of those acquisitions. I'd personally written press releases quoting the purchase figures that now appeared to be significantly inflated. James is involved in this? I asked, though the evidence was clear. Up to his neck, Lisa confirmed. His signature is on key documents. Either he knows exactly what's happening, or he's being incredibly naive signing whatever his father puts in front of him. The revelation was staggering. Not only was my husband planning to divorce me, but he was complicit in what appeared to be serious financial crimes. What should I do with this information? I asked. That depends on what you want, Lisa replied. If it's just leverage for a better divorce settlement, we have more than enough. If you're thinking bigger. She let the thought hang. I spent the next week in a daze, going through the motions at work while my mind raced through scenarios. I consulted Marcus, an attorney who specialized in both divorce and white-collar crime, bringing copies of everything Lisa had found. Marcus reviewed the documents carefully, his expression growing more serious with each page. This is substantial, he finally said. The tax evasion alone could result in criminal charges. The fraud related to the hotel acquisitions involves interstate commerce, which makes it federal. And if I were to report this? Marcus leaned back in his chair. That depends on your goal, Stephanie. Revenge? Protection? Bargaining power? I considered his question carefully. All of the above, I suppose. They're planning to ambush me with divorce papers, possibly on our anniversary. I want to be prepared. Then we need to be strategic, Marcus advised. First, protect yourself. Make sure you can't be implicated in any of this, separate your finances, secure your own records showing you weren't involved in these decisions. I nodded. I'd already begun transferring my personal savings to a new account at a different bank. Second, he continued, gather everything into an organized file. Copies, not originals. Have multiple backups in different locations. And then? Then we prepare for various scenarios. If they try to strong-arm you into an unfavorable divorce, you have options. If they threaten you, you have protection. Over the following weeks, I worked methodically through Marcus's checklist. I secured all my personal financial records. I documented every conversation with James and Harold. I forwarded relevant work emails to my personal account, especially those related to the acquisitions I'd handled PR for. The most difficult part was maintaining a facade of normalcy with James. I attended family dinners, made conversation, even slept beside him at night, all while knowing he was actively planning to discard me. Each morning, I awoke with a knot in my stomach, wondering if today would be the day they sprung their trap. James noticed my withdrawal but attributed it to work stress. You've been distant, he commented one evening. Is everything okay with the Denver project? The irony wasn't lost on me. Just finalizing details, I replied, watching his reaction carefully. A flicker of something, relief? Anticipation, crossed his face. Dad mentioned you might be traveling there soon. They were monitoring my movements, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The realization should have terrified me, but instead, it strengthened my resolve. With Lisa and Marcus's help, I assembled a comprehensive file documenting years of financial misconduct by Harold Bailey Enterprises, with James's complicit involvement. Tax evasion, fraudulent property valuations, misrepresentation to investors, and more. The pattern was extensive and damning. This is enough to trigger several federal investigations, Marcus confirmed when we reviewed the final documentation. Are you sure you want to go this route? Once set in motion, you can't control where it ends. I didn't start this, I replied, thinking of the divorce papers I knew awaited me. But I'll certainly finish it. The final piece came together when Lisa discovered Harold had been secretly meeting with competitors, potentially selling proprietary information about upcoming Bailey Hotel developments. Corporate espionage on top of everything else, Lisa said, handing me the surveillance photos. The man's hubris is truly something. I added these to my growing file. My own envelope that would soon match the one Harold planned to present me with. A week before our anniversary, James mentioned casually that his father was planning a special dinner to celebrate our 5 years together. The invitation confirmed my suspicions about their timeline. The night before the dinner, I made final preparations. I created 3 identical sets of files, one for my possession, one secured with Marcus, and one pre-addressed to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, ready to send with a single phone call. I also prepared a separate envelope, cream-colored, matching the Bailey family stationery, containing key evidence of Harold's crimes and James's involvement, distilled to the most damning documents. As I sealed this envelope, I felt a strange calm replace the anxiety that had been my constant companion for months. They thought they were laying a trap for me. They had no idea I had built my own. The dining room had fallen silent after Harold's declaration that I wasn't Bailey material. All eyes were on me, some pitying, others uncomfortable, Harold's triumphant. Only James couldn't meet my gaze, his focus fixed on the half-empty wine glass before him. I allowed the silence to stretch, feeling the weight of 12 pairs of eyes as I carefully smoothed the divorce papers back into their envelope. The documents trembled slightly in my hands, not from fear, but from a surge of adrenaline coursing through me. "Well," I finally said, my voice cutting through the tension. "This is certainly a memorable anniversary gift." Harold's mouth curved into a satisfied smile. "I'm glad we understand each other. The terms are quite generous, considering." I held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. The gesture, so contrary to my usual deference in his presence, visibly startled him. "Before we discuss terms," I said, setting the divorce papers aside, "I have an anniversary gift of my own to share." James finally looked up, confusion replacing the guilty expression he'd worn all evening. This wasn't part of their script. I reached into my handbag and withdrew my own cream-colored envelope, identical to the one Harold had presented me with. The symmetry wasn't lost on anyone at the table. "What's this?" Harold demanded, his confidence faltering slightly. "Just a small token to commemorate 5 years as part of the Bailey family," I replied, my tone conversational. "You've taught me so much about family, Harold. About loyalty. About what really matters." I stood, commanding the room's attention, and walked to Harold's seat at the head of the table. With deliberate slowness, I placed the envelope before him. "Aren't you going to open it?" I asked when he made no move to touch it. I put so much thought into selecting just the right gift. Harold's eyes narrowed, but family expectations of proper behavior were deeply ingrained. With everyone watching, he had little choice but to play along. He opened the envelope with a dismissive flick of his wrist, clearly expecting some emotional plea or desperate counteroffer to his divorce terms. As he withdrew the contents, his expression transformed from smugness to confusion, then to growing horror as he processed what he was seeing. The first page was a detailed summary of offshore accounts connected to Bailey Enterprises, complete with transaction dates, amounts, and James's signature on key documents. The second contained photographs from Lisa's surveillance, Harold meeting with competitors, exchanging documents in locations far from prying eyes. The third was a copy of a fraudulent valuation for the San Francisco hotel acquisition, showing the publicly reported price versus the actual purchase amount, with the difference laundered through a shell company in the Caymans. "What is this?" Harold hissed, his face draining of color. "Evidence," I replied simply. "Of tax evasion, fraud, corporate espionage, money laundering. Shall I continue?" "Where did you get this?" His voice had lost its commanding edge, replaced by something bordering on panic. "Does it matter?" I turned to address the entire table. "What matters is that comprehensive files documenting 15 years of financial crimes have already been prepared for delivery to the IRS, FBI, and SEC. Copies have been secured with my attorney, and key business partners of Bailey Enterprises received select information this morning." James lurched to his feet. "You did what?" I met my husband's panicked gaze steadily. "I protected myself. Something I should have done years ago." Harold attempted to regain control, shoving the documents back into the envelope. "This is absurd. A desperate fabrication." "Is it?" I retrieved my phone and pulled up an email. This message was sent to Martin Greer 3 months ago, discussing how to handle the Stephanie situation before it became a liability to ongoing operations. UBCC James, but unfortunately for both of you, your family attorney isn't as careful with his email security as he should be. Catherine gasped softly. April's husband whistled low under his breath. You've been planning to divorce me for months, I continued, while simultaneously involving me in marketing campaigns for properties purchased with fraudulent funds. Were you hoping to implicate me as well? Or just using me until I was no longer useful? James stepped toward me, his face ashen. Stephanie, this isn't what it looks like. Then what is it, James? I challenged. Explain to me why your signature appears beside your father's on documents transferring millions to offshore accounts. Tell me why the purchase price I announced in press releases for the Chicago acquisition was $20 million more than what actually changed hands. He had no answer, just stammered fragments of excuses that died on his lips. Harold slammed his hand on the table, making the crystal glasses jump. Enough. Whatever you think you have, it won't stand up. The Bailey name means something in this town. One phone call and this all disappears. I smiled then, a genuine smile that seemed to unnerve him more than anger would have. That's exactly what I expected you to say. Which is why copies of everything were delivered to 3 separate investigative journalists this afternoon, with instructions to publish if anything happens to me or if the federal investigations are mysteriously dropped. The blood drained from Harold's face. For the first time in our 5-year acquaintance, I saw fear in his eyes. You wouldn't dare destroy this family, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I didn't destroy anything, Harold. You did that yourself, the moment you decided your legacy was more important than your humanity. I turned to face the rest of the family. I'm sorry the rest of you have been drawn into this, but perhaps it's time the truth came to light. The room erupted into chaos. James's uncle Edward was on his phone immediately, presumably calling his financial advisor. April was crying quietly while her husband demanded answers from Harold. Catherine sat motionless, her expression unreadable. James grabbed my arm. What have you done? He hissed. Do you have any idea what this will do to us? Us? I echoed, gently removing his hand. There is no us, James. Your signature is on those divorce papers, remember? Your father just delivered them to me as an anniversary gift. Harold was frantically flipping through the documents I'd given him, growing more agitated with each page. This is blackmail, he sputtered. No, it's consequences, I corrected him. Something I suspect you've avoided for most of your life. I picked up my handbag and the envelope of divorce papers. I'll have my attorney review these and respond accordingly. In the meantime, I suggest you all prepare for some significant changes to the Bailey family dynamic. As I turned to leave, Harold made one last desperate attempt. Wait, we can discuss this reasonably. Perhaps we've been hasty. These divorce papers were just a negotiating tactic. The pathetic backpedaling might have been satisfying under different circumstances. Now it just felt hollow. A negotiating tactic, I repeated. How interesting that you view the dissolution of a 5-year marriage as a bargaining chip. But then, you've never seen me as family, have you, Harold? Before he could respond, I addressed the entire table one final time. The Bailey name means something in this town, Harold's right about that. By this time tomorrow, it will mean something very different. With that, I walked out of the dining room, leaving behind the stunned silence of a family whose carefully constructed facade was crumbling around them. As I reached the grand foyer, I heard footsteps behind me. It was April, her eyes red but her expression determined. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I should have warned you sooner. You did warn me, I reminded her. That gave me time to prepare. She glanced back toward the dining room, where raised voices could now be heard. What happens now? Now I move forward, I replied. And the Bailey family faces the truth. I stepped out into the cool evening air, feeling lighter than I had in months. Behind me, through the mansion's windows, I could see Harold gesturing frantically, James with his head in his hands, and the beginning collapse of an empire built on deception. The days following the anniversary dinner unfolded like scenes from a movie I was watching rather than experiencing. I had anticipated chaos, but the reality exceeded even my expectations. By morning, Harold had mobilized a team of attorneys and PR specialists in crisis mode. My phone lit up with messages, first pleading, then threatening, then offering astronomical sums for my silence and cooperation. I forwarded each to Marcus without responding. James tried to reach me nearly hourly that first day. When I finally answered, his voice was a mixture of panic and indignation. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he demanded without preamble. "Dad's been in emergency meetings since dawn. The board is calling for explanations. Our stock is already taking hits based on rumors." "That sounds stressful," I replied, my calmness clearly infuriating him further. "This isn't a joke, Stephanie. This is my family, my future. Everything I've worked for." "Everything you've worked for," I repeated. "Including planning my disposal like yesterday's trash?" He faltered. "The divorce. That wasn't entirely my idea," Dad thought. "Stop," I interrupted. "You signed those papers, James. No one forced your hand. Take responsibility for once in your life." "I'll take responsibility when you take down those files," he countered. "What do you want? Name your price." The question was so predictable it was almost disappointing. "This isn't a negotiation. The files have already been sent." There was a long silence before James spoke again, his voice lower. "The FBI contacted Dad this morning." "That was fast," I commented. "They must have already been investigating." Another pause. "What?" "Think about it, James. Financial crimes on this scale don't go unnoticed forever. My information probably just accelerated a process that was already underway." I could almost hear the wheels turning as he processed this possibility. The Bailey Empire had likely been under scrutiny for some time, my evidence merely providing the tipping point. "We can fix this," he said finally, desperation creeping into his tone. "Together. I'll tear up the divorce papers. We can start fresh." The offer might have tempted me once, even a week earlier, I might have considered reconciliation. Now it just sounded pathetic. "There's nothing to fix, James. I've already retained divorce counsel. You'll be hearing from them shortly." I ended the call as he began another plea. Within the hour, my phone rang again, this time with Catherine's name on the screen. I hesitated before answering. "Stephanie." Her voice was strained but composed. "I'd like to see you, if you're willing." "Not at the house. Somewhere neutral." I agreed to meet her at a quiet cafe the following afternoon, curious about what Harold's wife of 40 years might have to say. When I arrived, Catherine already occupied a corner table, her posture perfect as always, though new lines of strain marked her face. She'd aged years in a matter of days. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat across from her. "I wouldn't have blamed you for refusing." "I was curious," I admitted. Catherine nodded, stirring her untouched tea. "I owe you an apology, though I doubt it means much now. I watched Harold systematically undermine you for years and said nothing." "Why didn't you?" I asked. She met my eyes directly. "Fear, primarily. In 40 years of marriage, I've never once successfully opposed Harold on anything that mattered to him." The admission was startling in its honesty. "And James? Did you know about the divorce plans?" "Not until recently," she sighed. "When I found out, I suggested a private conversation, a dignified separation if that's what you both wanted. Harold insisted on his approach. The public humiliation was intentional, then. Harold believes in making examples of those who oppose him. I'm afraid you're not the first." We sat in silence for a moment before she continued, her voice softer. "What happens next, Stephanie? With the investigations?" "That's not up to me anymore," I replied. Federal agencies don't typically abandon investigations into millions in tax fraud just because the whistleblower asks nicely. Catherine nodded, resignation in her gesture. Harold's attorney says we should prepare for the worst. Asset seizures, possible criminal charges. I'm sorry it came to this, I said, and found I genuinely meant it, not for Harold, but for Catherine and others caught in the fallout. Don't be, she replied with surprising firmness. Perhaps it needed to come to this. She reached into her purse and withdrew a small USB drive. There's information here Harold doesn't know I have. Banking records, correspondence, meeting notes I've kept for years. Insurance, I suppose you'd call it. I stared at the drive she slid across the table. Why give this to me? Because you were right to stand up to them, and I never did. Her hand trembled slightly as she released the drive. Use it or don't, that's your choice. But someone should finally hold Harold accountable. That evening, I reviewed the contents of Catherine's USB drive with Marcus. It contained decades of meticulously documented financial manipulations, far more extensive than what we'd already uncovered. This is extraordinary, Marcus murmured, scrolling through the files. She's been documenting his activities since the 80s. Should we forward it to the authorities? I asked. Marcus considered. Let's wait. The investigation is proceeding without this. If it stalls or if Harold's team finds a way to obstruct justice, then we use it. By the end of the first week, the media caught wind of the story. Initial reports were vague, financial irregularities probed at Bailey Enterprises, but quickly grew more specific as sources leaked details. The business pages ran analyses of Bailey Enterprises' tumbling stock value. Industry publications speculated about the future of the hotel chain. Local papers, aware of the Bailey family's prominence, dug into the personal angles. James called again, his tone now desperate. The board is meeting tomorrow. They're talking about suspending Dad and me pending the investigation. Everything's falling apart. I'm sorry to hear that, I replied, surprising myself with my lack of satisfaction at his distress. Are you? He asked bitterly. This is what you wanted, isn't it? No, James. What I wanted was a husband who respected me. Who saw me as a partner, not an obstacle. What I wanted was the man I thought I married 5 years ago. The silence stretched between us. Finally, he spoke, his voice hollow. I don't know who that man was anymore. Neither do I answered quietly before ending the call. 2 weeks after the anniversary dinner, federal agents arrived at Bailey Enterprises headquarters with search warrants. The same day, Harold's attorney contacted Marcus with a revised divorce settlement offer, one that acknowledged my complete financial separation from all Bailey assets and offered additional compensation for distress caused. They're trying to distance you from the financial crimes, Marcus explained. It's actually smart. If you're officially separated from the family with a clean settlement, you're a less compelling witness against them. Should I accept? I asked. From a purely financial perspective, yes. The terms are extremely favorable. Harold's desperate to resolve at least one front of this battle. Marcus tapped his pen thoughtfully. But there's a non-disclosure clause that would limit your ability to discuss certain aspects of the marriage and divorce. That's the real price. I thought about it carefully. I don't need their money. And I don't want to be silenced. Marcus nodded, a hint of approval in his expression. I'll convey your refusal. By the 1-month mark, the Bailey empire was crumbling visibly. 3 board members had resigned. The stock had lost nearly 40% of its value. Hotel projects and development were suspended pending financial review. James made one final attempt to see me in person, showing up at my office unannounced. He'd lost weight, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. 5 minutes, he pleaded with the receptionist. Just 5 minutes. I agreed to speak with him in the building's lobby, unwilling to grant him the privacy of my office. You look well, he said, studying me with something like wonder. How can you look so well when everything's falling apart? Because I'm not falling apart anymore, I replied simply. For years, I tried to be what you and Harold wanted. Now I'm just being myself. James ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Dad's attorney says he might face criminal charges. Actual jail time, Stephanie. That's between Harold and the justice system. And me? He asked. What about me? I studied the man I had once loved enough to marry, trying to find traces of that person in the desperate figure before me. That depends on what you do next, James. If you continue following your father's path, you'll share his fate. I don't know any other path, he admitted quietly. Then I suggest you start looking for one. Before it's too late. As he turned to leave, shoulders slumped in defeat, I felt a strange mixture of pity and relief. The love I'd once felt had been replaced by something more complex, not hatred, but a detached recognition of a bullet dodged, a future narrowly avoided. That evening, I signed the lease on a new apartment across town. The following week, I accepted the position in Denver, with a January start date. As autumn progressed, I watched the Bailey saga unfold from an increasing distance, both emotional and physical. Harold eventually faced federal charges for tax evasion and fraud. James, through cooperation with authorities, avoided criminal prosecution but was removed from the company leadership. Bailey Enterprises was restructured under new management, its name tarnished but its core business salvageable. And I moved forward, one careful step at a time, toward a future I was finally free to define for myself. 6 months after the anniversary dinner that changed everything, I stood at the window of my Denver apartment, watching snow dust the Rocky Mountains in the distance. The view still took my breath away sometimes, not just the majestic landscape, but the freedom it represented. My new position as creative director for the agency's Western Division had proven to be everything I'd hoped for professionally. I led a team of 14, managed major accounts, and had already been recognized for innovative campaign strategies that significantly increased client engagement. But the professional success, satisfying as it was, paled in comparison to the personal growth of these months. Weekly therapy sessions with Dr. Landon had helped me process the betrayal and its aftermath, untangling the complicated web of emotions left by 5 years with James and the Bailey family. You're allowing yourself to feel anger, Dr. Landon had noted in our session the previous day. That's progress. She was right. For years, I'd swallowed my anger, convincing myself that patience and understanding would eventually win Harold's approval and strengthen my marriage. Now I recognized how that suppression had corroded me from within. My phone chimed with a text from Megan, who had visited twice since my move, saw this and thought of you. Karma's still working overtime. She'd attached a news article, former hotel magnate Harold Bailey sentenced to 8 years for financial crimes. I set the phone down without responding immediately. News of the Baileys no longer triggered the emotional turbulence it once had. Harold's sentencing was simply the logical conclusion to actions set in motion long before I entered the picture. My buzzer rang, lunch delivery, right on time. As I arranged the Thai food on my dining table, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Stephanie Morgan, I answered, using my maiden name which I'd legally restored 3 months earlier. Stephanie, it's Catherine Bailey. I hadn't spoken to her since our cafe meeting 6 months ago. Catherine. This is unexpected. I hope I'm not overstepping, she said, her voice stronger than I remembered. I wanted to let you know I'm moving to Arizona next month. My sister lives there. That sounds like a positive change, I replied, genuinely pleased for her. Harold's sentencing had been accompanied by significant asset forfeiture, but Catherine had negotiated to keep the family home in the divorce settlement that followed his conviction. It is, she agreed. I'm selling the Boston house. Too many memories, and frankly, too large for one person. We chatted briefly about her plans. As the conversation wound down, she hesitated before adding, James asked about you when I saw him last week. My hand tightened on the phone. How is he? Working for his cousin's construction business in Connecticut. Starting at the bottom, which is probably good for him. She paused. He's in therapy too. I'm glad to hear that, I said, and meant it. After we hung up, I sat with my cooling lunch, thinking about James. According to the terms of our now finalized divorce, he had made restitution for his role in his father's schemes through forfeiture of assets and cooperation with authorities. He'd avoided jail time but would spend years rebuilding a life from scratch. I hoped therapy was helping him understand the patterns that had led him to value his father's approval over everything else, including our marriage. Not for my sake, that chapter was closed, but for his own. My own healing journey had been aided immensely by unexpected allies. April, James's sister, had reached out regularly, her own life transformed by the family's collapse. She'd finally pursued her long-suppressed interest in environmental law, enrolling in law school at 42. I kept waiting for permission to live my own life, she'd told me during a phone call. Your courage showed me I already had it. Lisa, the private investigator who'd helped uncover the Bailey financial crimes, had become a friend as well. Her pragmatic perspective and unflappable nature provided balance to my sometimes turbulent emotions during the initial aftermath. And Megan remained my steadfast supporter, visiting Denver whenever her schedule allowed, helping me furnish my new apartment, and providing a willing ear when memories surfaced unexpectedly. The most surprising communication had come 3 months after my move, a letter from James's uncle Edward, the family financial advisor who had sat silently at that fateful anniversary dinner. You did what none of us had the courage to do, he'd written. Harold's methods troubled me for years, but I convinced myself loyalty demanded silence. I was wrong. Thank you for the painful but necessary awakening. These connections reminded me that the story wasn't simply about betrayal, but also about truth. How it could destroy and heal simultaneously. As spring arrived in Denver, bringing the mountains into sharper focus beyond my window, I received one final communication related to the Bailey saga. An email from James, its subject line simply, "Thank you." The message was brief. Stephanie. I've written this email 100 times in my head. No version seems adequate. I failed you in every way a husband could fail a wife. The man you married disappeared long before our anniversary night, gradually replaced by someone I now barely recognize. Therapy is helping me understand how I became my father's echo rather than my own voice. This isn't an attempt to reconnect or seek forgiveness, just an acknowledgement of truth. You deserved better. The divorce papers were the worst anniversary gift imaginable. Your response was actually the best gift I never deserved, a mirror forcing me to finally see myself clearly. I hope Denver brings you everything our marriage couldn't. James. I didn't reply. Some chapters are better left closed, their lessons absorbed but not revisited. Instead, I focused on building my new life, one choice at a time. That evening, I hosted a small dinner party for colleagues who had become friends. As conversation and laughter filled my apartment, I realized with a start that I felt genuinely happy, not the performed contentment I'd maintained during my marriage, but an authentic joy rooted in self-determination. The journey from that anniversary dinner to this moment had been painful, transformative, and ultimately liberating. I'd learned that sometimes the greatest gift isn't the perfect relationship or professional achievement, but the courage to stand firmly in your own truth, even when it comes at tremendous cost. The divorce papers Harold had so smugly presented were meant to diminish me, to remind me I would never be Bailey material. My response, that simple cream envelope containing years of evidence, wasn't really about revenge, though it certainly felt satisfying in the moment. It was about refusing to be defined by someone else's limitations. About recognizing that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from those who cannot see your worth. 6 months later, standing in my own space, creating my own path, I finally understood the most important lesson: true power isn't found in controlling others, as Harold had spent his life believing. It's found in the courage to reclaim your own story when others try to write it for you. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who underestimated you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life journeys, and share with someone who might need to be reminded of their own strength today. Thank you for listening to my story. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well, on your own terms.